I'm quite glad I came out on this channel about 3 years ago now. Back when I was only 10,000 subscribers, as opposed to getting any significantly bigger than that and dealing with the blowback of having a larger audience and then coming out. And that's not really speculation on my part. Every now and then I'll get a comment from somebody who basically says the equivalent of, I haven't seen you in years. My God, what happened to you? I won't watch anymore. Yeah. So what was the point of that little anecdote? Well, it has to do with the main topic that I want to talk about today, which is something that I see a little bit less than I used to, but I still see it. And I feel like it's one of those things that has been in the back of my mind to do as a general topic for a while when it comes to issues of representation. And that is the idea, and there's actually two sides of this coin. And it has to do with people who are already extremely well represented, cis, straight, white, hetero men. Let's just get that out there primarily. Who see more diverse casts or diverse main characters or heroes or gay relationships and say some equivalent of, you're alienating your fans. I'm not going to watch this. I can't relate to that. Or the flip side of that, telling minority people, why do you need something specifically pandering to you? A good character is relatable to anybody. Why can't you just be happy with the media that's out there if it's good? Which, as I said, two sides of the same coin and both rooted in the same core issues, which is basically tunnel vision. This is something that I actually have, not a completely unique, but I have a little bit more insight into this than sometimes happens when I talk about representation and people's perceptions of it. Because for a substantive portion of my life, I identified as a straight, white, heterosexual, cisgender man. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at someone being that. It's just the idea that I used to think I was that. I find that amusing. But as time has gone on, and especially over the last, probably about 5 years or so, as I've really come to embrace and kind of evolve into my gender fluidity and be just more myself in my presentations and my mannerisms and not worry about how it looks, I have found that I have a harder time relating to the kinds of media that I used to relate to previously, because I used to, or at least my perception of myself used to, much more directly correlate with the main characters in a lot of films and television. Whereas now, they don't so much. But I don't have to imagine quite as much that mindset, because at least partially, I can work off memory. And to a certain degree, these positions are understandable, and I do kind of get it. Because if you've never wanted for representation, if key parts of your sense of self, like your race, your gender, your sexuality, if those are frequently depicted, then you honestly do not know what it feels like to not have that. And the thing is, even when a piece of media comes out that has far fewer, or maybe doesn't have it all, or maybe only the bad guys and the and people were meant to laugh at, or the straight cis white men, or whatever. Even when that comes out, and if you feel distanced from that, it's still not the same. And honestly, a lot of people who are underrepresented, for whatever reason, aren't really going to be able to understand how it is you feel if you feel alienated by more diverse media. And the reason that they won't understand is because for them, and for me also at this point, we are used to having to find aspects of ourselves in people that in no way were built to represent us in core elements of who we are. It's been tackled by some other people across this platform, but there is a reason that a lot of LGBTQ plus people gravitate towards monster characters or something like the X-Men. Not originally explicitly written to be an analog for us, but we find a way to project ourselves into that, and we're used to having to do that. Because for most of us, it's something we've had to do our whole lives. In my case, maybe not my entire life, but from starting to come into my own as initially a cross-dresser, it's something I've been doing for almost 20 years. So it's something that we have, to a certain degree, acclimated to. And that doesn't mean that we don't appreciate it when we get actual legitimate representation, but it does mean that we're used to just dealing with it. We're used to finding other things to latch on to because these main core key elements of who we are not reflected back onto us. And if you are excessively represented in media, honestly, you don't have that skill. You haven't had years of having to project yourself in and find other ways to connect to characters. You don't have that muscle memory, for lack of a better term. You haven't worked that part of your empathy enough. You're not used to doing it, so it feels like more work. It feels harder, and it can feel like more of an affront when you can't connect to something because you're used to being able to if it's intended for a mass audience. Now, while to a certain extent I may have just validated that feeling, I need to stress something very hard, and I've said this before. I am not going to hold you responsible for your feelings and for your gut reaction to things because, honestly, you are not going to have a lot of control over that. The ability to control your initial gut level reaction, first of all, you have to recognize what it is that you are feeling and why, and then work really hard on that. It's going to take a long time to get over that. And it's a lot of work. It's work often worth doing if you realize the reason for your gut reaction is something that is uninformed or misguided or just destructive. But that does still take a lot of work, and I'm not going to judge you for your feeling of, I can't relate to this. I am, however, going to judge you on what you do with that feeling. You're not responsible for your first gut instinct. You are responsible for your behavior based on that first gut instinct, though. And when your reaction to other people being represented is to shout that it shouldn't be here, by whatever justification you care to throw over that, whether you try to justify it as unrealistic that a character is something other than white or other than male, or pandering, or propaganda, or pushing an agenda, however you wish to dress it up, if you're yelling at the very presence of people who do not get to see themselves in mainstream media, just don't. Because you are experiencing and need to learn how to grapple with and work that muscle and get it better, the need to empathize, to find a way to connect with characters and stories that do not speak directly to your own experiences. And honestly, that is a good skill to have for everybody. It's vital. And if it's underdeveloped and you're not willing to nourish it, well, you're just going to keep lashing out because you feel left out. And again, I do actually get why, but that doesn't make it okay to shout at the presence of diverse characters. It doesn't make it okay to shout at the presence of diverse fans. It doesn't make it okay to demand that you be pandered to. Because that's the thing. If you're going to make the argument that inserting people of color, queer characters, characters with disabilities, fat people, if you are going to argue that their presence is pandering to some audience, then you need to prepare to admit to the fact that if what you have is a bunch of heterosexual, cisgender, fit white men, then that's pandering to an audience. You don't get to call only one type of casting pandering and then pretend like if it's something that appeals to you, well, that's not pandering. No, that's as it should be. No, it's either all pandering or none of it is. So you need to be honest. Are you mad that there's pandering happening at all? Or are you just mad that you aren't the one being pandered to? And maybe you feel a little less special. You feel a little less acknowledged. A little less seen. Like maybe the people who made it aren't considering you. Well, if you're feeling that, then you are getting a tiny sliver of a glimpse of what people who do not have representation and don't get to see themselves in media, especially mainstream media intended for mass consumption, you're getting the slightest taste of what that's like. It's an opportunity for empathy. To take that feeling, that gut feeling of, examine it, question it. Think about why it's there. Think about whether it's helpful, whether it's constructive, and whether there's anything you can do to change it. Because you're still going to be pandered to by plenty of media. I mean, it was 20 some odd entries into the Marvel Cinematic Universe before we had our first female lead, black lead. I'm still waiting. I gotta wait for the Eternals before we get a queer character who's gonna have a name and has superpowers. You are plenty pandered to. Don't get mad and shout down people for getting a sliver of a pie just because you're used to having the whole thing. And look, like I said, I'm not going to judge you your gut instinct. I've had stuff I've had to get over. I've had stuff that I've had to examine. Still do. I'm not a perfect person. I've had gut reactions to things that I've looked at with a more discerning eye and gone, oh, I got to work on that. And I try to. And I'll always have work to do. We all do. And that's okay. And if you can't relate to something that speaks to people who aren't you, well, maybe think about why. I'm not saying you have to find a way to relate to it, but maybe try. And if you still can't, okay, fair enough. You still have no business shouting people down for wanting representation or for actually finally having it. So that's it, folks. This is another one that I'm just like, nothing specifically set this off, but it's just one of those things that's been percolating in the back of my mind for long enough. I'm like, let's get my thoughts on this on the record. What do you think about anything that I've said today? Whatever your thoughts are, I hope you'll drop something down in the comments and we'll talk about it. I have a Patreon, which is how this channel is supported and is in fact how I pay my bills and make my living. There are rewards for every tier, from getting to see the docket of what I'm going to do in the upcoming month to a Discord to your name in the credits. You'll be seeing those shortly. But if you're not able to do that, there's also YouTube memberships. Those help me out as well. Even if you can't do that, the likes, the shares, subscribes, hit the bell thing. Yeah, that's still there. Do that. Or don't. It's okay. I'm not going to tell you what you have to do, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council's adjourned.